One of these made him abandon directing for 6 months because he felt he could never match its perfection. One he watched over 30 times, taking notes each viewing to understand how the director achieved what he had failed to accomplish. And one made him publicly state that if he could erase his entire filmography and replace it with this single film, he would do so without hesitation. Number 10, The Loyal 47, Ronin, 1941 and 1942. Kenji Mizoguchi directed this 2-part epic for Shochiku Studios, with a combined runtime of approximately 380 minutes. He delivered what Kurosawa called the most formally perfect rendering of the legendary tale of the 47 Ronin who avenged their master's death and then committed ritual suicide. The story had been filmed dozens of times before Mizoguchi attempted it, but Kurosawa stated publicly that no version before or since matched Mizoguchi's understanding of how to use duration and stillness to create genuine tragedy rather than melodrama. The film follows the Ronin across years as they pretend to abandon their honor while secretly planning revenge. And Mizoguchi's commitment to showing that waiting, that erosion of identity in service of duty, is what Kurosawa identified as the film's supreme achievement. Mizoguchi was already established as one of Japan's finest directors when he made this film, known particularly for his long takes and his sympathetic portrayals of women in historical settings. The 47 Ronin story is fundamentally masculine, fundamentally about samurai code and the demands of honor, but Mizoguchi brings to it his characteristic attention to emotional cost and to the spaces between action where characters must live with their choices. Kurosawa saw this film during the war, when Japanese cinema was heavily censored and controlled, and he has said it taught him that even within the constraints of propaganda and nationalist mythology, a director who fully understood his craft could create genuine art. The film uses Mizoguchi's signature long takes and fluid camera movements to create compositions of extraordinary depth and beauty. Scenes that in other versions would be staged as confrontations or dramatic revelations are instead presented through sustained observation, allowing the audience to see not just what happens, but also what the characters feel about it. The final sequence, in which the 47 Ronin commit seppuku after completing their revenge, is staged with a ceremonial stillness that Kurosawa called the most moving depiction of ritual suicide in Japanese cinema. Kurosawa made his own Ronin films throughout his career, most notably Seven Samurai. Still, he always maintained that Mizoguchi's understanding of what honor actually cost was more profound than his own. In interviews late in his life, Kurosawa returned repeatedly to this film as an example of what Japanese cinema could achieve when a master filmmaker engaged seriously with national mythology without being consumed by it. The film was partially destroyed during the war, and complete prints did not exist for decades. When it was restored in the 1990s, Kurosawa advocated publicly for its preservation and called it essential viewing for understanding what samurai cinema could accomplish at its highest level. The formal discipline, the emotional restraint, and the willingness to let tragedy simply be tragic without offering consolation are qualities Kurosawa admired and attempted to emulate, but felt he had never quite matched. Number 9, Sword of Doom, 1966. Kihachi Okamoto directed this one for Toho Studios, with a budget that allowed for extensive period detail and elaborate sword choreography, and delivered what Kurosawa called the darkest and most psychologically complex samurai film ever made, a movie that completely abandoned the genre's conventions about honor and nobility, and instead presented a protagonist of pure nihilistic violence. Tatsuya Nakadai plays Ryunosuke Tsukue, a samurai whose swordsmanship is extraordinary and whose soul is completely empty. He kills without remorse or reason. He destroys everyone who comes into his orbit, and the film never explains or justifies or redeems him. He is simply a force of destruction moving through the world, and watching that destruction is genuinely disturbing. Kurosawa knew Nakadai well, having directed him in multiple films, including Yojimbo, Sanjuro, High and Low, Ran, and Kagemusha. But Kurosawa stated publicly that he had never given Nakadai a role that allowed him to be this frightening, and that Okamoto understood something about the actor's capacity to portray emptiness that Kurosawa had not fully recognized. Ryunosuke is not conflicted. He is not struggling with his nature. He has simply accepted that he exists to kill and that nothing else matters. That absolute commitment to a monstrous worldview is what makes the performance and the film so disturbing. The film is based on Kizan Nakazato's serialized novel, which was unfinished at the time of adaptation, and which remains unfinished to this day. That lack of resolution became the film's structure. Sword of Doom does not end. It simply stops. Ryunosuke has killed dozens of people. He is surrounded by enemies. The final sequence shows him in a sake house being attacked by seemingly infinite opponents, swinging his sword in darkness, and the film cuts to black without revealing whether he survives or dies. That refusal to provide closure is what Kurosawa identified as the film's greatest formal achievement. Miyagawa Kazuo's cinematography uses deep shadows and harsh contrasts to create a visual world that mirrors Ryunosuke's psychology. The sword fights are staged with such brutality that they are genuinely unpleasant to watch rather than exciting. People die messily, blood sprays, victims crowd out. The combat is not balletic or heroic. It is simply violent, and Okamoto holds on to that violence long enough to strip away any aesthetic pleasure it might otherwise provide. Kurosawa made films with dark protagonists, including Sanjuro and Yojimbo, but he maintained that his characters always retained some core of humanity or purpose. Ryunosuke has neither. He is the samurai film's ultimate monster, and Sword of Doom is the genre's ultimate rejection of its own mythology. Kurosawa called it essential viewing, and stated that if he had made it, his career would have taken an entirely different direction. The film's influence on darker samurai cinema that followed, including many Yakuza films that transpose the samurai code to modern criminals, is undeniable. It remains one of the most nihilistic films Japanese cinema has ever produced. Number 8. Harakiri, 1962. Masaki Kobayashi directed this one for Shochiku Studios with a budget of approximately 50 million yen and delivered what Kurosawa called the most devastating critique of samurai honor ever committed to film. A movie that systematically dismantles the mythology surrounding Bushido and reveals it as a system that devours the people it claims to serve. Tatsuya Nakadai plays Hanshiro Tsugumo, an aging Ronin who arrives at a feudal lord's estate requesting to use their courtyard to commit ritual suicide. The lord's retainers assume he is bluffing, attempting to extract charity by threatening suicide, which was an increasingly common koan by impoverished Ronin during the early Edo period. They tell him the story of another Ronin who attempted the same thing and whom they forced to actually commit suicide with his bamboo blade when they discovered his real sword had been sold for food. The structure of the film is built on flashbacks as Hanshiro tells his own story, and gradually the audience understands that the Ronin, the retainer's forced to die, was Hanshiro's son-in-law, a good man driven to desperate deception by poverty, and by the samurai code's refusal to allow him to work as a commoner. The suicide they forced him to commit was torture, and sawing through his own abdomen with bamboo while they watched and forbade anyone to assist him. Hanshiro has come not to commit suicide but to exact revenge, and the final confrontation in which he kills multiple skilled swordsmen before being overwhelmed by sheer numbers is one of the great tragic action sequences in samurai cinema. Kurosawa stated in multiple interviews that Harakiri accomplished what he had attempted in Seven Samurai but had not fully achieved, to show that the samurai code was not inherently noble, but a constructed ideology that served the powerful and destroyed the vulnerable. Seven Samurai suggests this through the farmers' fates and the final scene, in which Kanbei observes that the farmers have won and the samurai have lost, but Harakiri states it directly and brutally. The samurai code is a lie. Honor is performance, and the system requires human sacrifice to sustain itself. Nakadai's performance is extraordinary in its restraint. Hanshiro is not consumed by rage. He is methodical and sad, a man who understands exactly what his revenge will cost and who chooses it anyway, because there is no other response available to someone whose family has been destroyed by a system that claims to value loyalty and honor above all else. The film's final image. of the estate's elders commissioning a fabricated official record that erases what actually happened and preserves the appearance of honor, is one of the most cynical conclusions in the genre. Kurosawa called it a perfect film and said he could find nothing to criticize in its construction or execution. The screenplay by Shinobu Hashimoto, who had also written Seven Samurai and Rashomon for Kurosawa, uses the flashback structure to build sympathy and understanding before revealing the full horror of what the system has done. The film remains a landmark of samurai cinema and a permanent rebuke to any attempt to romanticize feudal Japanese military culture. Number 7. Samurai Rebellion, 1967. Masaki Kobayashi made this one 5 years after Harakiri, with essentially the same creative team, including Tatsuya Nakadai and cinematographer Kazuo Miyagawa, and delivered what Kurosawa called an even angrier and more politically radical critique of feudal authority than the earlier film. Toshiro Mifune plays Isaburo Sesehira, an aging samurai whose son is ordered by his lord to marry the lord's former concubine. The marriage is initially unwelcome, but becomes genuine and produces children. Then the lord's heir dies, and the lord demands that the woman return to become the mother of his new heir. She refuses. Her husband and father-in-law support her refusal, and the clan responds by attempting to take her by force. The film builds slowly and methodically toward the inevitable confrontation, spending substantial time establishing the family's relationships and making the audience understand what is at stake. This is not about abstract honor or duty. This is about a family defending itself against an arbitrary authority that treats people as property to be redistributed at its convenience. When the violence finally arrives, it is staged with the same brutal efficiency as Harakiri's climax. Isaburo and his son know they cannot win. They fight anyway because submission would be worse than death. Kurosawa identified Samurai Rebellion as the film that most directly challenged the legitimacy of feudal authority more than any film he had made, including The Hidden Fortress or Throne of Blood. Kobayashi was making an explicitly political film, using the period setting to critique contemporary Japanese authoritarianism and the post-war reconstruction of traditional hierarchies. The message was clear: arbitrary authority that treats people as instruments deserves rebellion even when rebellion is suicidal. Mifune's performance is more restrained than his work in Kurosawa's films, playing Isaburo as a man who has spent decades serving a system he never quite believed in and who finally finds a cause worth dying for. The transformation from dutiful retainer to rebel happens incrementally through dozens of small moments where he observes his son's happiness and his daughter-in-law's dignity and understands they are more valuable than clan loyalty. The film was a commercial success in Japan and received strong international critical acclaim. Kurosawa championed it publicly, calling it evidence that samurai cinema could engage seriously with political questions, rather than simply replaying feudal nostalgia. The film's influence on subsequent jidaigeki that questioned rather than celebrated samurai culture was substantial. Together with Harakiri, it represents Kobayashi's complete dismantling of the Bushido mythology, and Kurosawa acknowledged that Kobayashi had gone further in that dismantling than he himself ever had. Number 6. Samurai Spy, 1965. Masahiro Shinoda directed this one for Shochiku Studios, with a budget that allowed for extensive location shooting and experimental cinematography, and delivered what Kurosawa called the most formally radical samurai film ever made. A movie that used genre conventions as a framework for exploring modernist film techniques, including jump cuts, discontinuous editing, and deliberate disorientation of spatial and temporal relationships. The film is set during the late 16th century conflict between Tokugawa Ieyasu and Toyotomi Hideyoshi, and follows a spy named Sasuke who becomes entangled in conspiracies he cannot fully understand, which the film never fully explains. Kurosawa was already experimenting with formal techniques in his own work by 1965. Still, he stated publicly that Shinoda's willingness to completely abandon conventional narrative clarity in service of creating psychological and political confusion was something he admired, but could never quite bring himself to attempt. Samurai Spy operates more as a fever dream than as a conventional narrative. Characters appear and disappear without introduction or resolution. Loyalties shift without explanation. The camera moves in ways that deliberately disorient rather than guide the viewer. And the overall effect is a genuine rendering of what political intrigue feels like from inside, rather than from the clarifying perspective most films provide. Koji Takahashi's cinematography uses extreme angles, abrupt cutting between long shots and close-ups, and deliberate violation of continuity editing principles to create a visual language that matches the narrative's complexity. The action sequences are staged not as clean choreography, but as chaotic encounters, where it is frequently unclear who is fighting whom or why. That chaos is intentional and is what Kurosawa identified as the film's greatest achievement. Most samurai films impose order on historical chaos. Samurai Spy refuses that imposition and shows chaos as it actually was. The film was not a commercial success, and critical reception was divided between those who recognized Shinoda's formal achievement and those who found it incomprehensible. Kurosawa defended it publicly and called it essential viewing for understanding how samurai cinema could absorb techniques from European art cinema without losing its cultural specificity. The film's influence was greater on subsequent generations than on its contemporary audience. Still, filmmakers such as Nagisa Oshima and Seijun Suzuki cited it as permission to experiment formally within genre frameworks. Kurosawa made his most formally experimental samurai film, Kagemusha, 15 years after Samurai Spy, and he acknowledged Shinoda's influence on that project. The willingness to use color symbolically, to structure narrative through visual rhyme rather than through clear causation, to trust audiences to piece together meaning from fragments rather than explaining everything explicitly, all reflect lessons Kurosawa learned from Shinoda's example. Number 5. An Actor's Revenge, 1963. Kon Ichikawa directed this one for Daiei Studios, with bold use of color and theatrical staging techniques that Kurosawa called the most visually inventive samurai film he had ever witnessed. A movie that understood that cinema and kabuki theater could inform each other rather than existing as separate traditions. Kazuo Hasegawa plays dual roles: the Onagata actor Yukinojo, who seeks revenge against the men who destroyed his parents, and the thief Yamataro, who becomes entangled in that revenge. The film uses stylized sets, painted backdrops, and deliberately artificial lighting to create a world that exists between theatrical performance and cinematic reality. That hybrid approach is what Kurosawa identified as the film's revolutionary achievement. Ichikawa had already established himself as a director, willing to experiment with form, but An Actor's Revenge pushed his visual experimentation into territory that most Japanese directors avoided. The film uses split screens, iris shots, freeze frames, and color filters, not as technical gimmicks, but as narrative tools that reflect Yukinojo's psychological state and his existence as someone who lives constantly in performance. Kurosawa stated that watching it forced him to reconsider his relatively conservative approach to shot composition and editing, and that Ichikawa demonstrated that formal techniques could enhance rather than distract from emotional content. The revenge plot itself is Byzantine, involving 3 merchants who conspired years earlier to destroy Yukinojo's parents, and now hold positions of wealth and power. Yukinojo uses his access as a celebrated actor to seduce the daughter of one merchant, to manipulate the wife of another, and to destroy the business of the third. The machinations are complex, but the film presents them clearly through visual rhymes and recurring motifs that guide the audience through the conspiracy without requiring extensive dialogue. What Kurosawa particularly admired was Ichikawa's understanding that revenge narratives are fundamentally theatrical, requiring performance and artifice from everyone involved. Yukinojo performs femininity on stage and performs masculinity in his private revenge plotting. His enemies perform respectability while hiding their crimes. The film makes that performativity visible through its aesthetic choices, refusing naturalism in favor of acknowledged artificiality that paradoxically creates a deeper truth about human behavior. The film was a commercial success in Japan and won multiple awards, including recognition for Hasegawa's extraordinary dual performance. Kurosawa called it the film that made him understand kabuki and cinema were not opposed traditions, but complementary ones. that the stylization of kabuki could be translated into cinematic technique without becoming merely theatrical filming. He attempted similar experiments with theatrical staging in later films, including Ran and Kagemusha, both of which use color and composition in ways that acknowledge Ichikawa's influence. Owa, the boldness of an actor's revenge, its willingness to risk complete artificiality in pursuit of emotional truth, remained for Kurosawa an example of courage he respected, even as he recognized that his own aesthetic preferences tended toward greater naturalism. Number 4. Humanity and Paper Balloons, 1937. Sadao Yamanaka directed this one for PCL Studios, his final film before being conscripted and dying in China at age 28, and delivered what Kurosawa called the most honest depiction of lower-class samurai life ever made, a film that completely stripped away romantic notions of honor and showed poverty as the organizing reality of most samurai existence. The film is set in an Edo period slum, where unemployed ronin live alongside craftsmen, merchants, and criminals. There is no heroism here. There are only people trying to survive in a rigid class system that offers them no escape. Kurosawa discovered this film after the war, and was so moved by it that he worked extensively to ensure its preservation and championing. He wrote essays about Yamanaka's genius, stating that if the director had not died so young, Japanese cinema would have developed in fundamentally different directions. The film's refusal to idealize the samurai way of life, its willingness to portray ronin as essentially unemployable workers trapped by a code that prevented them from doing manual labor but offered them no legitimate means of support, was something Kurosawa attempted in his own films but never achieved, in part because of Yamanaka's complete lack of sentimentality. The film follows a barber named Shinza and a ronin named Uno who live in the same tenement. Shinza is practical and cunning, using whatever means necessary to support his family. Uno clings to samurai dignity even as his family starves. The film presents both approaches without judgment, but makes clear which one actually feeds children. When Uno finally abandons his principles and attempts a kidnapping for ransom, it fails catastrophically and ends in his death. The film's final image of paper balloons floating away suggests the emptiness of the honor and dignity that Uno died preserving. What Kurosawa identified as revolutionary was Yamanaka's complete commitment to showing the material reality of poverty without a romantic overlay. Most Jidajiki films of the 1930s were nationalist propaganda celebrating samurai virtues. Humanity and Paper Balloons quietly undermined that entire project by showing that for most samurai, their code was a trap that ensured intergenerational poverty and meaningless death. The film was made just as Japan was entering full militarization, and its anti-authoritarian subtext was not lost on military censors, though they allowed its release with minimal cuts. Akira Mimura's cinematography uses the cramped tenement quarters to create a sense of complete entrapment. Characters are constantly crowded together, forced into proximity that breeds both solidarity and resentment. The few outdoor sequences, rather than providing visual relief, simply show more poverty and more people trapped by circumstances they cannot control. Kurosawa stated that this film taught him that setting and mise-en-scène could carry an ideological critique more effectively than dialogue, and that showing the physical reality of poverty was more powerful than having characters discuss it. Number 3, The Life of Matsu the Untamed, 1943. Hiroshi Inagaki directed this one for Toho Studios during the height of wartime censorship and production restrictions, and delivered what Kurosawa called a miracle of subversive filmmaking, a movie that appeared to conform to militarist ideology while actually depicting a protagonist whose complete rejection of authority and social convention made him the antithesis of everything the wartime government promoted. Tsumasaburo Bando plays Matsu, a wandering gambler and sword fighter who serves no master, respects no authority, and follows only his own sense of justice and loyalty to fellow outcasts. Kurosawa was making his own films under the same wartime restrictions when this was released, and he has stated that watching it gave him hope that genuine artistry could survive censorship, that a clever director could work within the system while subverting it. The film ostensibly celebrates traditional Japanese values of loyalty and honor, which satisfied military censors, but the loyalty Matsu demonstrates is to prostitutes, gamblers, and other social outcasts rather than to feudal lords or military authority. The honor he embodies is personal rather than institutional, and his rejection of the samurai class system, despite his obvious martial skills, implicitly critiques everything Bushido represented. The film was made quickly and relatively cheaply by Toho standards, but Inagaki used those constraints creatively. The limited sets become spaces where character development can occur through dialogue and performance rather than through visual spectacle. The fight sequences are brief and unglamorous, depicting violence as something to avoid when possible and to end quickly when necessary, rather than as an aesthetic performance. That practical approach to combat was something Kurosawa admired and attempted to replicate in his own action staging. Bando was already in his 50s when he made this film and brought to Matsu a weathered authenticity that younger actors could not have achieved. His Matsu is tired, cynical about authority, protective of the weak, not from nobility, but from recognition of shared outsider status. The performance influenced how Kurosawa thought about casting, particularly his decision to cast Takashi Shimura repeatedly in roles that required weary integrity rather than youthful heroism. The film's ending, in which Matsu defeats his enemies but remains a wanderer with no home and no prospects, reinforced the character's rejection of settled existence and conventional success. During wartime, when every film was expected to contribute to national unity and military morale, a protagonist who explicitly rejects all institutional authority and chooses permanent outsider status was genuinely subversive. Kurosawa recognized that the film subverted and called it essential viewing for understanding how cinema could resist even during periods of intense political repression. Number 2. Chushingura, 1962. Hiroshi Inagaki directed this color widescreen version of the 47 Ronin story for Toho Studios with a massive budget and 3-year production timeline, and delivered what Kurosawa called the definitive cinematic rendering of Japan's most important cultural narrative. A film that balanced spectacular production values with genuine emotional depth and historical authenticity. The cast included virtually every major Japanese actor of the period in an ensemble production that gave each of the 47 Ronin distinct characterization, rather than treating them as interchangeable units of samurai loyalty. Kurosawa had considered making his own version of the 47 Ronin story multiple times throughout his career, but ultimately declined, stating that after seeing Inagaki's version, he understood anything he might attempt would be compared unfavorably. The scope of Inagaki's production, the attention to period detail in costumes and architecture, the careful pacing that allowed each stage of the revenge plot to develop fully across the film's 3-hour and 20-minute runtime, all represented a level of epic filmmaking that Kurosawa admired, but felt was not suited to his own directorial temperament. The film follows the familiar narrative of Lord Asano's forced seppuku after drawing his sword in Edo Castle, his retainers' transformation into masterless Ronin, their patient planning over 2 years while pretending to abandon their honor, and their final assault on Lord Kira's mansion that succeeds in avenging their master before they commit mass suicide. What distinguishes Inagaki's version is its attention to the political complexity surrounding the revenge, showing that not all the Ronin were equally committed, that some harbored doubts about the plan's wisdom, and that the Tokugawa shogunate's ultimate decision to allow them honorable suicide rather than executing them as criminals was itself a complex political calculation. Kurosawa particularly praised the performances of Koshiro Matsumoto as Oishi, the chief retainer who must appear to have abandoned honor while secretly planning revenge, and Yuzo Kayama as Asano, whose brief screen time establishes the tragedy that drives everything that follows. The film treats its massive cast with democratic attention, giving even minor Ronin moments of characterization that make their deaths feel individually tragic rather than abstractly heroic. The assault sequence, staged with Inagaki's characteristic attention to the tactical realism, influenced how Kurosawa thought about filming large-scale action in his later epics, including Ran and Kagemusha. The use of snow as both an atmospheric element and a practical obstacle The depiction of the Ronin's systematic clearing of Kira's mansion room by room, and the absence of a musical score during the violence, allowing only the sounds of combat, all created an assault that felt genuinely dangerous rather than choreographed for entertainment. Number 1. Sansho the Bailiff, 1954. Kenji Mizoguchi directed this one for Daiei Studios in the final years of his career. He delivered what Kurosawa called, without qualification or hesitation, the greatest Japanese film ever made, and the work against which all his own achievements must be measured and found wanting. The film follows a family destroyed by feudal cruelty, a father exiled for excessive mercy toward his subjects, his wife sold into prostitution, and his children sold into slavery to the bailiff Sansho. The son, Zushio, grows from an idealistic child to a hardened overseer, before a spiritual crisis restores his humanity and leads him to sacrifice everything to free the slaves and search for his lost mother. Kurosawa saw this film shortly after completing Seven Samurai, his own epic about compassion and sacrifice, and stated that it made him understand that his film's achievements were modest by comparison. Where Seven Samurai showed heroism triumphing temporarily against impossible odds, Sansho the Bailiff showed that compassion and mercy inevitably lead to suffering in an unjust world, and that choosing compassion anyway, despite that certainty, represents the highest form of human dignity. That tragic moral clarity was something Kurosawa attempted in his subsequent films, but never achieved to Mizoguchi's devastating purity. The film's visual style, built on Mizoguchi's signature long takes and camera movements that observe suffering without exploiting it, represented for Kurosawa the ultimate expression of cinematic humanism. The camera maintains distance from the character's pain while remaining emotionally present, a balance Kurosawa found almost impossible to achieve in his own work. He tended toward either expressionistic close-ups that emphasized individual psychology, or wide shots that emphasized landscape and action. Mizoguchi's ability to show both individual suffering and social structure simultaneously through composition and camera movement was something Kurosawa studied obsessively, but felt he never successfully replicated. The reunion scene between the adult Zushio and his blind elderly mother, who has spent decades as a prostitute on a remote island and who can barely remember her son's name, is one of the most emotionally devastating sequences in cinema. Mizoguchi shoots it without manipulative close-ups or musical emphasis, simply observing two people destroyed by the system, trying to recognize in each other what remains of the family they once were. Kurosawa stated this scene alone justified cinema's existence as an art form. The film was not a significant commercial success, and Mizoguchi died 2 years after its release. Kurosawa worked extensively to ensure its preservation and international recognition, writing essays praising it, screening it for Western filmmakers, and repeatedly stating publicly that if his entire body of work could be erased and replaced with Sansho the Bailiff, he would make that exchange without hesitation. That statement, from a director of Kurosawa's stature about a contemporary's work, has no equivalent in cinema history and represents perhaps the most profound professional tribute one artist has ever paid another. These 10 films represent the works that humbled cinema's greatest samurai director. Kurosawa championed them publicly, studied them obsessively, and acknowledged they achieved what he could not. Coming from the man who made Seven Samurai, Rashomon, and Ran, that admission carries weight no critic's praise ever could. The films remain essential viewing,